"Target down! Found the nursery!" a voice called out. Wyatt, trembling and frightened beyond measure, looked up at the 5 Marines entering the room, searching for more enemies to kill. The one at the front of the group saw him and stopped. "Holy shit! We got a living kid here! Delta 2, take him out of here yesterday!" the man ordered. "Understood," Delta 2 answered, holstering her weapon and rushing to the trembling, frightened Wyatt. She picked him up and held him close to her. Wyatt wrapped his arms around the armor-clad woman for dear life as she broke out into a run. White noise filled his ears and time slowed to a crawl around him. Nothing made sense as everything was nothing more than a blurry haze. He didn't know when or how it happened, but when he regained a sense of things, he was sitting in a medical bay with a nurse tending to his wounds. He looked around with tired, drained eyes and saw several more wounded children and a few adults. Most of them were crying, others stared at nothing with wide, lifeless eyes. Surrounded by other humans, he was safe. He had survived. He was alive by pure, unfair luck. His friends were dead. He saw Wantum and many of his teachers and classmates die right in front of him. He witnessed the methodical, casual brutality of the Drazan firsthand. But he was alive. He would see his parents and siblings again. He would listen to Mr. Warlow's rants. He would taste the stew of the old lady, Mrs. Uvol, once more. "You're a brave young man," the nurse said, finishing patching his hands. "You're safe now, kid." A whine escaped his throat. At long last, Wyatt cried out in anguish. "APNV Nor Navio, Medical Bay." Clara and Cynthia could only stare at Wyatt with a mixture of pity, sorrow, and shame. Throughout his entire retelling, the pilot never once cried. Not a single tear was shed. The pain was palpable with every word he spoke. The anger and the sadness was intoxicating. The atmosphere around him was thick, choking. But they stood put, listening to every word, never interrupting him until at long last he finished with a lengthy, soul-wrenching sigh. "That's why I know the Drazan," he said coldly. I can't begin to imagine," Clara began, but didn't know how to react to such a story. She wasn't ignorant of the atrocities carried out by the Drazan, but she'd never heard such a personal, gut-stabbing story before. Wyatt shrugged. "It doesn't matter." "Of course it matters," Cynthia hissed. She was used to slaughter from a young age, but even her limits were tested after hearing Wyatt's retelling of events. His memory was clear and vivid, a blessing and a curse. "It wasn't your fault." Wyatt turned to Cynthia and stared at her with cold eyes. "I know it wasn't my fault. I was just a scared kid. What could I have done to save my friends? I wouldn't be here otherwise," he said, frowning. Honestly, despite those words, it wasn't your fault. The doctors and the therapists used it all. The fucking time. I grew sick and tired of hearing them, as I grew sick and tired of being seen with pity." The two women averted their gaze slightly. Wyatt sighed. "I did not mean to offend you," he corrected quickly. "That's not the pity I was talking about." "Then what is?" Cynthia pressed gently. "Of my school. I was one of the only 172 that survived. One of the 1,026 in total," Wyatt said, clenching his hands. "I told them about Sirhan Gimor's deal, and no one believed me. They thought I hit my head too hard, and I imagined it." He let out a mirthless chuckle. "Pitied me for being delusional and spreading lies about Sirhan Gimor?" Clara and Cynthia exchanged a glance, already suspecting what Sirhan had done and how the events had been morphed in his favor. Clara placed a hand against the pod and asked, "What did the official report say?" "That Sirhan Gimor masterfully eluded the Drazan forces and retreated to call for reinforcements and valiantly rescue his loyal subjects." Wyatt gritted his teeth for a moment, then relaxed. "He was credited with the victory over the raiders. He won many accolades for that. That damnable whoreson met with the families of the fallen without a shred of shame, swearing on his honor that he avenged them." Clara felt a rope tug at her heart, but she had to know. "Do you know, perchance, if that victory increased his position within his house?" Wyatt nodded. "It won him the governance of Numato, a colony world, "A few jumps from Volantis," he answered bitterly. "He reigns there, to this day." He used the tragedy to further his standing and position at the price of thousands of innocent lives, to save his own stinking, rotten one, Cynthia said, disgusted. Such machinations were, after all, a common tool in the arsenal of the more ambitious and ruthless nobles across the principality. "Wyatt, if I may know, how are you so functional, what you went through and experienced? Such a thing has the potential to traumatize veteran Marines, let alone a mere child." Wyatt shrugged. "I don't know myself," he replied. "For the next 2 years, every shadow scared me. I spent almost every night in my mother's embrace at night." He closed his eyes. "The nightmares came almost every night. I woke up screaming, crying, pissing," he said bitterly. "Because of my lies, I was forced to another school and I never made another friend, because everyone avoided lying Wyatt. I never heard from Waff again either. Every tree, every branch, every plant made me shiver in fear. I barely kept my scores up. I barely talked. And when I did, I talked to the therapists," he chuckled. "They never helped." Clara and Cynthia listened closely, watching the pilot describe his life with such a cold, uninterested detachment that it sent a shiver up their spines. "When I was 10, I went out to play, and I approached a tree, and I touched it, then I hugged it, and I knew that it wasn't a Drazen." He paused and opened his eyes. "I don't know when or how it happened, but one day, I was no longer afraid of anything. My dream was still the same, and the stars called to me, but I never wanted revenge, but I was angry. So angry. Angry at the Drazen, angry at those that called me a liar, angry at the nobles. I never had a nightmare after that day, and I rarely dreamt again. I studied as much as I could. I read and practiced, trained and worked. My life was meaningless, but I could live a good one in service to the principality that saved me. I made a promise to go to the stars, but not in search of blood, unless it came to me. If I can save lives for the exchange of a worthless commoner, then I'll die happy." Clara looked down at the pilot, the man she judged as a true knight, and felt nothing but sorrow now that she witnessed how broken he truly was. His mask was strong and forged in the fires of adversity and unimaginable pain and suffering. But now she could see the obvious cracks, like crashing waves against rocks. Sadness crashed against her heart. But I won't die a stupid death. Honor is worthless, and if I ever meet Serhan Gimor again, I'll kill him. I'll kill him even if it kills me. My friends and Miss Carla and my classmates and everyone else deserved to live. They deserved better. Better than a cowardly noble that traded their lives away." Wyatt cried out, and finally tears appeared in his eyes. Cynthia frowned, concerned. "Wyatt?" Wyatt glared at empty space and gritted his teeth tightly. His eyes reddened with pure rage. "Wyatt, calm yourself," Clara said, leaning forth against the glass while the pilot started to struggle against his restraints. "Alert! The patient's heart rate and blood pressure are increasing to dangerous levels. Applying sedative," announced the Medicare AI. Wyatt didn't hear any of them. "They didn't deserve to be eaten by the Drazen. Do you hear me, Serhan Gimor? I'll fucking kill you, you whoreson. You'd better hide from me, or I'll drag you to the Drazen myself." "Wyatt!" Cynthia and Clara cried out at the same time when they saw blood dribbling out of his nose and his veins bulging against his skin. His eyes were disoriented, lost in a haze. The raging man fought against his constraints for a few seconds, but the fight left his body quickly. His ragged breathing weakened, and his eyes returned to normal. Wyatt returned to his senses and turned to the two women looking down at him with worried expressions as tears fell down his cheeks. "When was the last time I cried?" he thought to himself as consciousness began to leave his body. "I'm just a commoner," he sighed, and a second later, darkness embraced him once more.